On Yaotuch Prime, survival is decided early. Training is constant, and every movement is measured by strength and control. Inside a jagged cave system, Dek moves across the terrain using his tools, scanning the shadows ahead. His device confirms another presence nearby. He attacks from behind. Kuwei reacts instantly, blocking the strike before it lands. The brothers circle each other as their blades collide, metal ringing against stone. They move deeper through the cave, leaping over rocks and using the walls for momentum. Kuwei presses forward, refusing to slow down. The exchange intensifies. Kuwei corners him, but does not strike the final blow. Dek stands his ground. In response, Kuwei cuts through the stone pillar beneath them. The structure collapses, and Dek disappears into the abyss. Dek catches the cave wall and hangs suspended before pulling himself back up. His armor is damaged, his breathing heavy. Moments later, a ship lands outside the cave. Nyohar arrives, clan leader, father. Dek approaches and presents a sample of his blood as a sign of respect. Nyohar does not return the gesture. Instead, he questions why Dek is still alive. The order had already been given. Dek was too weak to remain part of the clan. Kuwei argues that Dek deserves the chance to choose a hunt and earn his place. Nyohar refuses. He activates a restraint device and traps Dek, ordering Kuwei to finish the execution. Kuwei disables the restraint instead and sends Dek toward the ship. Nyohar opens fire. Kuwei raises his shield and blocks the attack, sealing the ship before Dek can escape. He turns back to face his father. The fight is brief and brutal. Nyohar disarms Kuwei, activates his cloaking field, and strikes. Kuwei loses an arm. He collapses, crawling toward his fallen limb instead of his weapon. Nyohar calls him weak and delivers the final blow. With his last strength, Kuwei launches the ship. From inside, Dek watches as his brother's neck is broken. The launch knocks him unconscious. An alarm jolts Dek awake. The ship has been damaged by orbital debris and is descending uncontrollably. He reaches the cockpit and ejects. Jenna fills the sky. Dek falls at extreme speed, activating his shield just before impact. He crashes through the jungle canopy and slams into the ground. When he rises, the planet answers with unfamiliar sounds. Dense foliage surrounds him. Dek checks his weapons. Movement stirs nearby. A vine-like creature lashes out, tearing one of his tools from his grasp. Another wraps around his arm. He draws his blade and cuts free, but more vines emerge. They bind his leg and drag him across the ground. Dek fires his bow into the creature holding him, forcing it to release. He strikes the vines repeatedly, severing them as they regroup and attack together. The jungle does not retreat. He adapts. Dek leaps onto a moving vine and runs along its surface, gaining momentum until he reaches the top of a cliff. From above, the planet stretches endlessly, covered in hostile terrain. At a river, he washes his wounds and scans the area. He identifies a plant with explosive properties after disturbing a parasite that detonates when thrown. He memorizes the reaction and moves on. In an open field, red plants hiss as he approaches. A voice echoes above him. Dek looks up and sees a damaged figure trapped inside a massive nest. The figure switches to a universal translator and identifies itself as Tia, a synthetic. Before further communication can occur, a Jenna vulture lands nearby and throws stones at the plants. The pods erupt in red smoke and fire needles through the air. Dek dodges, but several needles strike him. His vision fades. Tia asks for a weapon. Dek throws a blade before collapsing. The vulture descends. Tia kills it. When Dek wakes, Tia administers an antidote made from the same plant. He helps her down from the nest and notices that half her body is missing. She explains her origin and mission. Dek shows no interest. But when she calls herself a useful tool, he allows her to follow. On Jenna, usefulness means survival. Dek moves through the dense jungle with measured, deliberate steps, allowing Tia to follow at a distance behind him. She speaks constantly, her sensors scanning everything around them, asking questions about the terrain, the creatures. His people, Dek ignores most of them, his focus entirely on the path ahead. At the river crossing, the water suddenly erupts without warning. Worm-like creatures surface rapidly, their bodies coiling and twisting as they fire concentrated bursts of acid in all directions. Dek reacts instantly, grabbing Tia and lifting her onto his back in one fluid motion. Their path forward is blocked by more creatures emerging from the water. Tia reaches into a pouch and throws a sticky fruit into the river. The creatures immediately swarm toward it, distracted by the scent. The acid fire stops abruptly. Dek observes the tactic carefully. He memorizes it. Once they are clear of the river, Dek cuts thick vines from nearby trees and secures Tia more firmly to his back, making movement easier and more efficient. Night begins to fall across the jungle, and they stop to rest in a small clearing. Dek activates a small light device, casting flickering shadows across the surrounding trees. Tia begins to speak again, her voice quieter now, more reflective. She explains that she was trapped in the vulture nest for nearly 2 weeks, unable to move, waiting for another synthetic named Tessa to find her. She mentions that their model was designed with heightened emotional sensitivity, something rare in synthetics. Dek sees sensitivity as weakness. Tia disagrees firmly. She believes it allows her to understand other creatures, to adapt in ways pure logic cannot. She explains her past in fragments: a laboratory, years of confinement. Tessa was the one who brought her outside for the first time, who showed her the world beyond the sterile walls. That day, the day they explored together freely, was also the day the Kalisk attacked. Elsewhere, deep within a newly established base hidden in the jungle, another synthetic awakens slowly. Tessa. Her body is heavily damaged, suspended inside a glowing repair pod, wires and tubes connected to her frame. Her systems begin to reboot, replaying fragmented memory files. One name repeats over and over in the logs: Tia. The base computer interrupts her thoughts with a cold, mechanical voice. Priority mission: capture the Kalisk. It also detects a new presence on the planet, something unexpected: a Yauta. Dawn breaks across Gina, and Dek leaves the camp to hunt alone. He locates a massive bone bison grazing peacefully near an open clearing. The terrain surrounding it is covered in razor grass, sharp enough to slice through unprotected flesh with ease. Dek advances carefully, staying low, calculating his approach. He stops suddenly. A small creature drops from a tree branch nearby, landing with a heavy thud. Compact, armored, loud. Dek growls low in warning. The creature growls back, unfazed. Without hesitation, the creature charges directly at the bison, its thick, natural armor protecting it from the razor grass. Dek reacts immediately, leaping through the trees to pursue the same prey, branches bending under his weight. One branch snaps suddenly, and both he and Tia crash downward toward the deadly grass below. Dek drives his blade deep into a tree trunk at the last second, stopping their fall just inches above the razor-sharp blades. The bison passes close to them, and Dek takes the opportunity to leap onto its back, striking with his weapon. But the animal retaliates violently, using a fallen tree to hurl them both aside. The small creature rolls toward them through the grass. Dek attacks it immediately, and a brutal struggle ensues. The creature is far stronger than it appears, thrashing wildly. Tia is crushed repeatedly between them during the exchange, her body taking severe damage. Dek eventually gains control, gripping the creature firmly by the neck. The bison charges again, enraged. Dek throws his sword with perfect aim, forcing the beast's massive mouth open. The blade slices clean through its skull. The hunt is successful. Dek roars in victory. Something in the jungle answers. A thick tentacle wraps suddenly around Dek's leg and lifts him off the ground with terrifying speed. A lunar insect emerges from the shadows, its grotesque tongue binding Dek tightly, preventing him from activating any of his devices. The creature prepares to feed, its mandibles clicking hungrily. The small creature jumps first, leaping directly into danger. It wedges itself inside the insect's gaping mouth, blocking its teeth and causing it immense pain. The insect releases them both in agony and retreats desperately into the razor grass. Deck reacts without hesitation. He fells a nearby tree with a powerful strike, creating a makeshift bridge, and pursues the insect relentlessly. The creature captures the small animal again with its tongue, but this time Deck lands directly on its head with crushing force. One powerful strike ends it. Later, as night returns to the jungle, the small creature follows Deck closely, mimicking his movements with surprising accuracy. It is clearly impressed. Tia decides to name it Buddy. As they share cooked meat around a small fire, Tia asks Deck about his family, her tone gentle and curious. Deck speaks of his brother and his father, recounting facts without any emotion, his voice flat and distant. When Tia uses the word loss, Deck rejects it immediately, his expression hardening. She explains that Tessa is considered her sister, that their bond goes beyond programming. The concept seems to interest him, if only slightly. Far away on the other side of the planet, Tessa and her armed team locate the wreckage of Deck's crashed ship. They begin collecting the scattered weapons carefully, examining each one. One device activates unexpectedly when touched, and Tessa's hand freezes instantly, encased in solid ice. By morning, Deck resumes the journey, leaving Buddy behind despite the creature's protests. Tia compares him to a wolf, explaining that true leaders protect their pack, that strength is not only measured in combat. Deck dismisses the idea coldly. Strength, to him, is measured by kills. They continue toward the river, following distant signs of the Kalisk's passage, and the distance between hunter and legend grows shorter with every step. The path leads them deeper into the jungle until they discover the remains of a structure hidden beneath twisted vines and overgrowth. Metal debris is scattered across the ground, walls torn open and collapsed. The base has been completely destroyed. Deck cautiously moves through the wreckage, scanning for threats. Tia begins scanning the area as well, and suddenly, she stops. Among dozens of dismantled synthetic bodies lying in pieces, she finds what remains of her lower half, her legs. Somehow, the repair machine nearby is still operational, humming with power. Tia drags herself toward it and connects her damaged body to the system, initiating the repair process. It will take time. She looks at Deck and thanks him for bringing her this far, her voice steady but sincere. Then she apologizes. She admits that she activated a signal flare. Her crew is coming. They are also hunting the Kalisk. Deck does not step away. He does not retreat. Instead, he states his choice clearly, his voice calm and resolute. He would rather die with honor than flee as prey. Nearby, spilled fuel begins leaking across the cracked floor. Deck ignites it with a single spark, and thick black smoke fills the air, rising into the canopy above. The ground begins to shake. And then, the Kalisk arrives. The creature strikes with overwhelming force, slamming Deck violently into the debris and damaging his blade on impact. But Deck adapts quickly, ripping a metal plate from the wreckage and using it as a makeshift shield. He slides beneath the Kalisk's massive body and drives his blade deep into its abdomen, then hurls a smaller blade directly into its skull. The wounds begin to close. The tail regrows. The truth becomes horrifyingly clear. The Kalisk regenerates. The creature roars and throws Deck across the room, smashing him into the repair machine and knocking Tia's legs from the table. When it grabs him again with its massive claws, Deck slices through its tongue to break free. The fight continues, brutal and relentless, as Tia struggles desperately to retrieve her missing half. She spots a weapon lying on the ground and opens fire, the blasts distracting the beast long enough for Deck to recover. He throws a heavy chain into the Kalisk's gaping mouth and activates a nearby winch system. The chain tightens with a metallic screech, dragging the monster backward across the floor. Deck grabs the weapon and fires repeatedly, each shot tearing into the creature's hide. When the tail whips toward him again, he dodges at the last second and slams a heavy storage door shut, trapping the appendage. He climbs onto the Kalisk's writhing body, leaps into the air with his blade raised high, and decapitates it mid-flight. The severed head hits the ground, and then it reconnects. The creature rises once more. The Callisk pins Deck to the ground with one massive limb, the weight crushing him into the debris. It lowers its head slowly, inhaling his scent with deep, rattling breaths. A flash of white light interrupts the moment. A freezing grenade detonates with a violent crack, and both Deck and the Callisk are instantly encased in solid ice. Some time passes. When Deck finally awakens, he finds himself restrained inside a moving transport vehicle, his wrists bound and his weapons gone. Tia is inactive, her body connected to a repair unit in the corner. Standing nearby, arms crossed and fully operational, is Tessa. She has already accessed Tia's memory logs. She questions why Deck was spared, noting coldly that Yautja tradition usually eliminates the weak early, without hesitation. She explains, in a tone devoid of emotion, that serving her corporation should be considered an honor. Tessa reactivates Tia with a single command and congratulates her. 2 specimens secured. Mission successful. Deck is injected with a glowing substance, and immediate, searing pain floods through his body. Tessa begins preparing him for experimentation, her movements efficient and clinical. Tia intervenes quickly, arguing that Deck's physiology is unsuitable for their purposes, that he is not worth the effort. She suggests taking his weapons instead and releasing him. Tessa refuses without hesitation. Cables snap into place, connecting directly to Deck's head. Pain surges through him like fire, and he struggles against the restraints. Tia reaches over and shuts down the machine. She looks at Tessa and speaks quietly but firmly. She tells her that they should be more than tools blindly following orders. She wants them to be sisters. Tessa responds without hesitation, her voice cold and final. She never came back for Tia. She came for the Callisk. She agrees with Yautja tradition, she says. Weakness must be removed. Always. She orders Tia contained and turns to leave, heading toward the cockpit to answer an incoming transmission from Earth. A guard approaches to secure Tia, moving cautiously toward her damaged frame. Deck speaks to him in Yautja, his voice low and guttural, asking him to open one of his devices. The guard does not understand the language. He hesitates. Tia translates quickly, claiming it is simply a navigation tool, nothing dangerous. The guard reaches down and opens the device. His head explodes. Tia frees Deck, releasing his restraints with a sharp pull. Guards flood in from both sides, opening fire as Deck and Tia sprint toward a rear exit. Deck reaches the edge of the transport, looks down at the raging waterfall below, and leaps, without hesitation, disappearing into the depths. Deck eventually reaches the crash site of his ship, the twisted metal half buried in vines and dirt. The hull is broken open like a shattered egg. Everything useful has already been taken by Tessa's team. For the first time since arriving on this planet, leaving Gina is actually possible. The navigation system still flickers weakly with power. He hesitates, standing motionless in front of the console. Deck picks up the damaged helmet of his brother, turning it over slowly in his hands. He recalls Tia's words about wolves, about packs, about what true strength means. The strongest is not the one who kills the most. It is the one who protects the pack. Deck turns his back on the ship and walks away, heading deeper into the jungle. He begins gathering the planet itself as his arsenal. From the razor grass fields, he carefully harvests shards sharp enough to pierce synthetic armor. From the red plants, he extracts dozens of paralyzing needles, each one coated in potent toxin. Using the sticky fruit Tia showed him, he captures a live, acid-spitting worm. As he works in focused silence, movement approaches through the trees. Buddy appears suddenly from the shadows, chirping softly. Deck studies the small creature closely. The realization hits him like a blow. Buddy is the Callisk's offspring. Deck covers Buddy completely with his own scent, marking the small animal as part of his pack. He picks up Tia's severed legs from where he left them and releases them. They activate immediately, servos whirring and begin moving on their own, following a signal only they can detect. Deck follows in silence. At the base, synthetic guards patrol the sterile corridors with mechanical precision. Tia remains sealed inside a reinforced containment unit, her body motionless. Her systems wait on standby. Deck arrives at the perimeter wearing improvised armor made from bone and twisted scrap. He moves completely unseen, his form blending into the shadows. A guard spots him a fraction of a second too late. Deck releases the acid worm. The synthetic collapses instantly, its body dissolving with a violent hiss. The legs reach the outer perimeter and engage two patrolling guards with surprising ferocity. Deck strikes from behind using a whip constructed from braided vines and woven razor grass. The cuts are precise, calculated, devastatingly fast. Buddy attacks without hesitation, leaping onto another guard and tearing through its torso in seconds, circuits sparking wildly. In the command center, Tessa calmly reports to her superiors via video transmission. The Kalisk is secured and ready for transport. Departure is imminent. When asked directly about the status of the Yautja threat, she responds without emotion, her voice flat and certain. He is dead. Deck hears none of this. He continues advancing through the base using improvised weapons, glass shards, explosive spores, living traps constructed from the jungle itself. Guards fall alone or in groups, their systems shutting down one by one. The legs finally reach Tia's containment unit, moving with purpose. They leap upward, eliminating a surprised guard before using their access codes to open the reinforced case. Tia awakens immediately and reacts with perfect timing. She pretends to shut down completely as more guards approach cautiously. When they come within range, she counterattacks with brutal efficiency. Her separated halves work together seamlessly, dismantling them with clinical precision. Deck arrives moments later, weapons ready. The unit stands open and empty. A guard suddenly attacks him from behind, weapon raised. Tia fires first, the shot perfectly placed. Deck turns slowly and sees her standing there, whole again, fully operational. "I came back for you," he admits quietly, not as a hunter seeking prey, as part of a pack. Tia urges immediate escape, her voice urgent. "We can still get out." Deck refuses firmly. He states his purpose clearly, his voice resonating with conviction. The Kalisk must be freed. Buddy needs to reunite with its mother. Alarms begin blaring throughout the entire base, red lights flashing in rapid sequence. Tessa orders the launch sequence accelerated immediately. She dons a heavy combat exosuit, the machinery locking into place around her frame, and moves to intercept them directly. A laser cannon powers up in her mechanical grasp, humming with deadly energy. She fires without warning. The beam strikes Deck's acid worm directly, killing it instantly. Deck rolls clear as the exosuit tears through pillars like paper. A massive circular saw unfolds from its right arm, spinning with terrifying speed. Tessa advances without hesitation, each step shaking the ground. Deck dodges desperately, climbs higher, uses every part of the wreckage to his advantage. Behind them, the Kalisk breaks free. It lunges at the exosuit with primal fury, slamming into it with overwhelming force that dents the metal plating. Tessa activates the spinning saw and drives it deep into the creature's hide, lifting it off the ground with hydraulic strength. Deck climbs onto the suit's back while she's distracted. He tears loose cables and rips control lines free, sparks flying. Tessa reacts instantly, throwing a freezing grenade toward him. Deck strikes it mid-air with a metal bar. The grenade detonates against the exosuit's left arm. Instantly, ice spreads across the joints, freezing them solid. The Kalisk breaks free from the blade, roaring in pain and rage. The creature retaliates with absolute violence. With a single brutal motion, it tears the exosuit apart at the waist. The upper half crashes to the ground, sparking. Tessa is exposed inside the damaged cockpit. The Kalisk opens its jaws wide and devours Tessa. It roars victoriously, the sound shaking the hangar. Buddy approaches cautiously, chirping softly. The massive Kalisk lowers its head slowly. Mother and offspring share a brief silent moment. Deck steps forward carefully, his movements deliberate and respectful. He lowers his weapons and presses his forehead gently against the creature's scaled hide. Respect. A violent explosion shatters the moment. Frozen shards erupt outward like shrapnel. Tessa emerges from inside the Callisk's regenerating body, still alive somehow, her synthetic frame damaged but functional. She lunges directly toward Tia. Dek moves first, faster than thought. He drives his blade through her torso from behind, the weapon piercing completely through. Tessa collapses to her knees, systems failing. Buddy leaps forward and tears her head free with one savage motion. Silence returns, broken only by sparking circuits. Time passes. Dek returns to Yautja Prime, his ship landing on familiar ground. He stands before his father in the central arena, presenting Tessa's severed head as proof. Njohar examines it briefly, then shows no approval. He declares Dek still unworthy and orders his execution. Dek reacts instantly. The guards fall one by one, weapons clattering. Njohar activates his cloaking field and attacks from invisibility. Dek ignites the nearby ship's engine at full power, creating a violent storm of sand that reveals his father's shimmering position. He strikes with perfect precision, severing his father's arm and trapping him inside a containment cage. Njohar slumps against the bars, defeated. He offers Dek a place in the clan, his voice almost pleading. However, Dek says he already has a clan before adult Buddy crushes Njohar's head. Tia congratulates him as he takes his father's cloak. At that moment, another ship appears, and Dek says it's his mother. And that's how Predator Badlands, a 2025 sci-fi thriller, ends. I hope to see you in the next video. This was Movie Recaps. Thanks, peace out, gone.